So this question will be first for Clinton and then Daphne. So the first question is, what do you believe is the main reason why systemic racism and white privilege have a stronghold on America? And we'll go to Clinton first. Clinton, you have 3 minutes.
There we go. I'm unmuted here. So I think the main reason is that, different from many other countries, our United States of America was basically founded on the fact that we were separate races, right? This was a slave economy. That's why we have black and white people here. And yeah, we've made some advances, we made some progress, but at the same time, I think that, I'm from Dallas, and you see that the majority of black communities are in one area and white communities are in the other. Majority of schools are either all white or all people of color. So I think the systemic racism persists because, number one, we don't get to have many interactions beyond stereotypes, right? And then at the same time, for whatever you want to call it, white supremacy is the default, right? So you might not be an overt racist, you're not burning crosses in someone's yard, but the fact that you're living in a society where you were born into a society that was created on racist principles, that's the society you live in. So whether or not you're, oh, hey, I don't have any racist tendencies, we all grew up in a society where there are racist tendencies and maybe not intentional on our parts, but me as a white male, I'm not going to sit here and say that I have not benefited from my color growing up. As a man, as a white man, I have been given opportunities that people of color, black men and women, did not have. So, that is the default. And until people realize there's different kinds of racism, the overt racism where you're physically or actionally doing something against a person of color, or, hey, you're benefiting from this in a society where you think there is no problem. There is no, hey, racism ended in the 1960s. What are you talking about? So to deny that that is an issue today is the problem. So I think the way to end that, or at least to start developing actions like Daphne said, is to first understand that, yes, we do live in a society that has racism, that has white privilege. And then once you've admitted that as a white member of society, then open dialogue can occur.
All right, well, thank you so much for that, Clinton. And Daphne, same question to you. Daphne, you're still muted. Oh.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's like, I'm trying.
We gotcha. Okay, your time starts now.
What do you believe is the main reason why systemic racism and white privilege has a stronghold on America? Greed, for one thing, and the Constitution in itself on its face is inherently flawed. It was not written to benefit people of color. It was written to benefit white males, period. Until we address the real issues of the Constitutions, not making Band-Aids and putting bandages on things, until we address the real issues and rewrite some things, we will always have racism. It's something that has been ingrained, like Clinton said, it's been ingrained in us for these years, all of these years. So that's it. Greed, the thirst for power, wanting to be on top, the fear that it's you can't even really put it into words, because what I feel may not be what other people feel. My experiences may be different from other people's experiences, but it all comes down to the main thing: greed. Greed. Someone wants to dominate, or a group of people want to dominate. I'm sorry, y'all. It's a whole lot. I have a lot of personal things going on, and then it's just so much to cover on this aspect. And that's the bottom line. I don't see anything else. The biggest thing is just that other people want to dominate other people. And it's all about money, power. That's what the slave trade was about. That's what the transatlantic slave trade was about. That's what the Civil War was about. Just trying to rule over other people, conquering the entire world. It started long before the slave trade. Alexander the Great wanted to conquer everything. So that's where we are.
Absolutely, and great point. Since we are missing Genevieve, if either the two of you, Clinton and Daphne, if you have any other thoughts, I can give you both a minute if you would like to share any other thoughts on this topic, or we can move on to the next question.
I'll add something to Daphne's point in terms of greed. I mean, I totally agree, whether it's financial or power. You know, hey, white people have been very comfortable on top for generations, and to not acknowledge that is wrong. And the little that people are asking for to be equal, I forget who said this, but when we see 98%, if people are giving 2%, people are suddenly thinking, oh, we're losing power as a white society. I mean, come on, people, sharing power, sharing resources, sharing education, that's going to enhance our entire society, right? And believe it or not, going to school, sharing neighborhoods, I think people have to get over the fear, and society, including white society, will only be better for it. So I think besides greed, there's a fear that is unfounded, but has been stirred up by those in power, and hopefully can be identified and corrected over time.
And Daphne, did you have a follow-up that you
Yeah.
share?
So Michelle Alexander in The New Jim Crow, she states that denying African American citizenship was deemed essential to the formation of the original Union. They took away, and today it's still perpetuated with things like the prison industrial complex. When you take away rights from people, or before you even take away rights, we didn't even have rights, couldn't vote. Grandfather couldn't vote, great-grandfathers couldn't vote for myriad of reasons. Slavery, poll taxes, and then you had tests. And now they're limiting polling places. So they're still limiting the vote. So those type things. And then her last quote in the introduction says, as a criminal, you have scarcely more rights and arguably less respect than a black man living in Alabama at the height of Jim Crow. We have not ended racial caste in America. We merely redesigned it. And so that is what's going on. We're not dismantling anything. We're changing laws, but we're writing them in such a way that people cannot understand them. And that's what Clinton said, education. Education is the key. We were denied education for so long for this reason, because education is the great equalizer, right? Well, yeah, it would level the playing field. And so that's where we are. Lack of education.
Thank you both, Clinton and Daphne. Excellent points made into that question. And please, again, the chat feature is open. So if you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to share those as panelists are sharing their thoughts. So we'll move on to question 2 now. Question 2, on this one, we have Joshua, Justin, and Christine who will be participating for this question. And this question is, what are the not so obvious ways that systemic racism and white privilege take place in America? And we'll start with Joshua. Joshua, you have 3 minutes, and let me know when you are unmuted and ready. All right, I see you are.
I was thinking about this, and I was trying to think about how to best articulate it. And so you guys will just have to bear with me. But I'm a recruiter, and in my experience, some of the ways that it's so, I guess, continual, that things continually happen is that people will discriminate and say, oh, well, they just make up reasons as to why they don't want to pick a person of color over a person that is white. Or I could give them all people of color, all really fantastic candidates, and they will pick the white person. And I've seen it continual across, whether it be whatever discipline, whether it be accounting, IT, finance, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's throughout the whole thing. And I'm working, in my organization to try to change that, to try to call that out. But it's so systemic, it's so widespread, and it's not just at my organization. It's everywhere. And so I think, if I can see it, why isn't anybody else seeing it and doing something about it?
That's a rhetorical question, Joshua.
It's I guess not rhetorical, but I feel so limited when I'm fighting and I'm fighting against this that is that I don't know how to solve, that I'm dealing with these people and managers and owners and stuff like that they can't quantify why they don't want the person of color that may have double the degrees or experience, and without saying, oh, I just don't want that person of color, and so it's frustrating because I take it very personally, when I'm sitting trying to do my job and what I feel is bring the best candidate to bring change, I'm sorry, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of my experience.
So what do you say?
I try to nail them down as hard as I can on qualifications. Like how many years experience we want. What does this person have to do? And so then that way, and I can tell you, it sometimes still doesn't matter. And I bring it up to higher ups, and I'm trying to integrate some AI into our hiring process, where that would eliminate some of that where they don't have a choice, but it is a hard.
Let me ask you this. How do you know so is this after interviews or this is from the application process? Because how are we knowing how are we discriminating? How do we know when these candidates are Black or people of color? Are we going by name or what?
And Joshua, I'll give you, because of this type of question, I will give you 90 seconds to answer. However, I do just want to remind everyone that we do want to be respectful of the program and as it goes. If we do have deeper questions, please utilize the chat. Connect with each other. Feel free to connect with each other in the chat room. These are definitely conversations that are worth having. However, we do want to be respectful to the program that Demetria's established. So Joshua, if you don't mind answering that question, I will give you 90 seconds to be able to give some more insight into the HR perspective.
Okay, people, I guess that, can you repeat the question really quick?
What do you do about it?
Oh, what I do about it? I bring it to my boss. I bring it to her boss. And sometimes things can change and sometimes
Hold on,
not.
I'm sorry, Joshua, I did not repeat the question correctly.
That's okay.
My question was, how do you all know? How do you know from the application process if a person is of color or what? Are we going by name?
So
What's the flag?
a lot of times when people apply, it just goes into like a data bank. And this is the quickest version. And so it'll say name, school, experience, location of where they live. All of that stuff, unless you take that stuff off, it's so easily to discriminate against any one of those things. And, you know, zip code, who would even think that? But there's just so many ways. And so until you take that away from it, I feel it. You know, I can tell, like, you know, like I can feel that the decision why they did it, but I can't prove it, I guess.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Clinton mentioned the zip codes earlier.
And I went ahead and I'm putting this question in the chat if it lets me, but I think I kind of captured the spirit in what you're asking. What is a human resources perspective on systemic racism and hiring, and how can we combat roadblocks such as zip code, name discrimination, school discrimination, education, qualification discrimination for POCs and Black applicants? Daphne, do you feel like that captures the spirit of what you were asking?
Connection must be.
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Okay. Did that
You cut out, so I didn't hear your question to me.
Okay, I was saying I'm putting it in the chat if it will let me. But what I gathered from your question is, I said, what is the human resources perspective on systemic racism and hiring, and how can we combat roadblocks for people of color and Black people of color who are applicants? Does that capture the spirit of what you were asking?
Pretty much, yes. Okay,
so we'll get that to Joshua and any other HR professionals who are on the call, so they can deep dive into that, because that definitely is an issue, and it's one of the things that's our first taste of racism is it's either in education or it's in hiring. So we'll move along and we'll go ahead and ask Justin. Justin, I will just repeat the original question for you. What are the not so obvious ways that systemic racism and white privilege take place in America? And we'll put 3 minutes on the clock for you.
I actually want to come back to the first speaker. I forgot his name, but one example is basically living and growing up in a neighborhood where everybody looks the same. Nobody ever questions their privilege. I think the huge part is not talking about it, and it needs to be talked about, and people should understand that our skin color should be acknowledged in order for us to realize, us and everyone to realize, that this is a big deal in our country. And back to the neighborhood, everyone looks similar. Lots of people have the mentality of, we never thought of race as our problem, and our privilege afforded us the ability to decide it wasn't. The difference between me and a white man is getting verbally assaulted in a room. The difference is he can walk out and not suffer, and I can get up and I will always be looked at differently because I am different. Back to Daphne too, she was saying that even today that there are so many things just basically just wrong, and there are still people today getting turned away just because of their skin color. Let's see. And that's why it's a big reason why I say your silence is violence, because it's time to be anti-racist. It's no longer okay with just being okay with racist. Did that answer?
Definitely no. I think that definitely gave a good perspective. You do have 1.5 minutes left if you want to add anything to that, or if anyone else wants to add something to that point.
No, I think I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, and Christine, you are the next person up. Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready. Can you hear me okay? All right. So for me, I had a kind of a few things I wanted to address when I thought about this. And at the top of that was political redlining and the way that is sort of set up within our states and our system. And a big problem with that is even when you get down to the schools, let's say, my kid, I have an 11-year-old son, and I moved us to a predominantly Black neighborhood on purpose because I wanted him to see a level of Black success. But now he's ready to go to middle school, and there are less funds allocated through property taxes to our schools, in the sense that we don't have the same quality of schools as maybe a person, over in the next neighborhood in a predominantly white community. Because of the way that certain redlining is set up, it blocks access to those funds and resources for students of certain neighborhood types, which, historically will be, broken down by race, right? So now, people are getting less access even to education due to that redlining system. I mean, it impacts voting as well, and that's a big issue, and you want to get in, if you want to even get into the big pieces, NRA, the support of, when Philando Castile was murdered, there was no comment from the NRA. Our access to weaponizing ourselves in states where we are legally able to do so is not supported in the same way as, our white counterparts in other communities. And the biggest thing that I would say is just kind of the state of the marijuana industry now. States have turned this into a booming business to profit their states and their districts, but meanwhile, there is still a number of Black people sitting incarcerated in prison, particularly our men, for things that should have been decriminalized then. So instead of making our communities whole by saying, if we're going to sell this at a state level and make a profit off of it, we need to get these people that were jailed due to this out of the prison system, because it should have been decriminalized. They're not doing that. They're profiting off of something that, was Black community related, so they said. And now that it's of benefit, they've kind of taken that power away from even gaining wealth in communities that way. And they've shut the door on people to ever be able to do it legally, because they've criminalized them and thrown them in jail. So those are just kind of a few of the issues that I saw when I was thinking about some non-obvious ways that systemic racism and white privilege play a part in today's society.
Ooh, Christine, thank you for that. Brought up a lot of great points, from redlining, criminalization, and now decriminalization of marijuana when it comes to our counterparts who are white, being allowed now permits to sell weed versus, we still have lots of men and women who are Black and brown in jail. And may be in jail for the rest of their lives, depending on the area and the sentencing and stuff. So many, many great points, a lot there to unpack. So now we're going to get to the part of the program where we're going to take a little kind of break, per se, from the questions. We now have our keynote speaker, which I'm going to throw things back over to Demetra to introduce. She's going to introduce our keynote speaker, who is Mr. Dave Dennis.
So yes, as Amy just mentioned, we do have a special guest with us today. He is my uncle, I'm very proud to say.
Demetra, we're having a little bit of trouble hearing you.
Yeah?
Yes.
Pretty good. Okay, let me just scoot up.
Okay.
Okay. So as I was saying, a very special guest with us today, my uncle, David J. Dennis Sr. He and my auntie Maddie were very, very instrumental in the civil rights movement, obviously back in the day. My uncle Dave is a retired attorney. He did participate in the first freedom ride from Alabama to Mississippi back in '61. He also was a Southern Regional Program Director for the Congress of Racial Equality, we all know as CORE, and that was from '64 to '65. Currently, he's the president and CEO of Positive Innovations Incorporated and the Southern Initiative Algebra Project. So he is still in the realm of helping others and working for equality. So with that, Uncle Dave, take it away.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this very important discussion. And it's so good to be with the young people, I guess, you know. What I like to do is to talk briefly. I've been lucky enough to have been able to live through what I call two surges in the civil rights movement, and both surge forward and surge backwards. And that is the movement of 1960 and also the movement that's going on now. I'm also want to say I'm very, very proud about young people, especially those who've been very much involved in Black Lives Matter. And so I want to try to make a little comparison to, as brief as I can, is about what was going on in my day and what's going on today is, and what I think is needed in order for us to be able to address this issue in a more powerful way. First of all, it's true that I was involved in the sit-ins in the 60s. And I was on the first bus, and I also participated in the movement in both Louisiana and Mississippi from 1961 through 1965. I was part of the organizing of Freedom Summer that you might have heard of in Mississippi in 1962 through 1964. And that's where I met Demetrius' aunt, Maddie, who was from Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and who was also a field secretary for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee at that time. So one of the things that was happening that is not seen, I like the statement of the young lady who talked about having her wanted a child to grow up in the Black community. And at one time during the day when I was growing up is that we had what we call real communities, Black communities. In fact, that was our strength in the civil rights movement. We would be, when Black people were brought into this country being as enslaved people, the first thing they did was to weaken the family structure by causing the parents to be separated from the children and from each other. And so what we had to do was develop our own family structure. So the Black community developed what we call the extended family. That is that we looked out for everybody. The children who grew up at that time we didn't look at just biological parents. Our parents were the community. So the children were the parents of the children of the community. And so when I walked down the street, I mean, everybody knew me. I was known as Sonny, and hi Sonny. And if I did something wrong, I mean, they knew about it. And if I did something wrong in the neighborhood I'd be chastised. The people in the neighborhood had the right to chastise me, just as my parents did, because the fact is I was like one of their children. And when I got it from them, when I got home, I got it again. I never understood that is because the fact is that my mom or my grandparents knew about it, and we didn't have a telephone or anything like that but they'd be waiting at the door for me, you know. But at any rate is that was a community. We had our own grocery stores that a lot of people don't understand. And we had our places that we could go and we could eat. We had restaurants and other places. So we did have an economic base in the early days, in the 60s and before that. So when people say that we didn't, we did. And there was a strength there. Back in the 60s and stuff, we did begin to have demonstrations. And then there was the largest marches, like I was part of at Southern University in 1960-61. We talked about thousands of kids into the streets. It was not very difficult at that time to get a movement started. Demonstrations, large numbers of people involved, because the fact is we had this community structure. So you knew what was going on in the community and everybody was looking out for each other. And then came what we call the surge, began to sort of like a surge back. It was involved with the surge forward at the same time. We had to pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act and 1965 Voting Rights Act. And so this is where all the demonstrations and things we had and the deaths of our people is. We had the very close friends of mine. I was with Medgar Evers about an hour before he was killed. We were at the same rally and we teased each other. He said, why don't you come home with me and watch it. I think that was President Kennedy at that time was getting ready to announce or introduce the Civil Rights Act of 1964 although this was 1963. I jokingly told my friend, going riding in the car with you, a man can get killed. And so Maddie and I were together. That time is when we went home. A little while later, we got a call that Mech had been killed. It's another group of people. Beyond that is that we had Cheney, Goodman, Swerner, very good friends of mine. I was with them 24 hours before that they were killed in Neshoba County. So a lot of my friends during that time we actually lost about 19 people. And so during this period of time, we had to make, the people in the civil rights movement had to make a decision. And that the decision is whether or not we were going to have to expand this movement to include more white people into the movement. And I'm bringing this in now is because it becomes very essential and important to the further discussions down the line. So we had to make that decision. The decision was made based on the fact is that although our people were being killed, I mean, before Cheney, Goodman, Swerner, primarily those who were being killed in the South were Black people. And so there was no real attention being given to that, not even with Medgar. You know, people marched, but after that it was totally forgotten. There's no real investigations around those cases. And so what happened there is that we had to figure out a way, how do we get attention to the country that this was happening, people who were trying to deal with their rights, the right to vote, and the right to be able to sit down and be first-class citizens. So we thought we have to do is try to get involved here. Is we got involved what we called at that time the children of the Constitution, which at that time we considered to be white people rather than Black people, were the children of the Constitution. If we got them down there, then people in this country, outside white people, would then begin to give more attention to what was going on in the movement. So how do we get that conversation into that community so that attention can be given to the real plight of Black people in the South and other places in the country? So we brought down 1,000 people, knowing that people were going to be, some were going to be killed, knowing that some people were going to be seriously hurt. So during that move pieces, that's when Cheney, Goodman, Swerner was missing. And two of the three, as you know, were white, Andrew Goodman and Mickey Swerner, killed in that pieces, and the country was awakened to the point is wanting to do something. And we began to have these 1,000 kids in, and then we brought a lot of attention into the country. So we had to move that conversation. And that conversation then began to move to other parts of the country, but it couldn't be moved by us as Black people. It had to be moved by white people to talk to white people in the white communities because that's who had the real power at that time. So the other piece happens to be is that in terms of the movement, we did get the Civil Rights Act passed and the Voting Rights Act passes, but to me that's what I consider to be the Trojan horses of the civil rights movement were those two acts. And I'm going to explain why to you very, very briefly. At that time if you look at newsreels from that time people like the George Wallaces and others were saying yeah, but we'll be back. We're not giving up here, you know? And so they did. So all of that, the Civil Rights Act was great. It was a good thing there is, but we slept through it because the fact is that we did not understand how power really operated. So what really happened during that time was that other types of programs were embedded into the Civil Rights Act that we didn't understand, like the poverty program. We felt that the poverty program was there to help, but it really was not, because what it really did was drain off from the Black community's leadership, who became leaders of the poverty program, and they had offices and stuff downtown and moved them out of the Black community pieces into downtown. We also talked about the fact okay, here we got access to, and we integrate, we got a right to go down and sit down in a place we want to go to any restaurant, go to movie theaters, whatever they have. But we forgot our own businesses that existed in the community. So our business began to die. The little mom and pop stores that you had almost every corner, whereby if you needed a quart of milk, you could go and sign in for it. And then the end of the week you came in and you paid for it because you didn't have money otherwise. When the Piggly Wigglies and the Wiggly Pigglets began to be developed, it drained off for those particular communities and drained off to the businesses that exist within the community. So that was an attack, an intentional attack on the economic base that we had in the Black community. And then we had what we call urban renewal, where you had strength. If you look at your communities where you are now, where you had real Black businesses in Texas, across places, Shreveport, Louisiana, if you look at it, Dallas, Atlanta, North Carolina, South Carolina. And so they began to build what they call these expressways. It was under the guise of urban renewal. All of these expressways, we noticed, went right through the Black community where the economic base was, tearing it apart. And as a result of that is we lost our businesses. So the whole economic base has what I consider to be an intentional attack on the community. There was another attack is, if you read back then, there was a thing called the Moynihan Report. They came out around the same time is that really blamed Black people for the discrimination and racism in the country by saying the fact is our family structure is what was causing most of the problems because we didn't have stable families, which is not true at all. And so what you had there is that the Moynihan Report really said that when you came from a single parent home, which most of we had at that time, but not by design, is that you were doomed to failure. And so people really bit into that is, and these kids, people growing up in single parents were sort of looked down upon as not being, good kids. So you look at this piece is, was all this, he was a plan in terms of that really began to erode the power of Black people, voting power, and what we have is economic-based power is in our own culture and our own belief in our strength is within the extended family. Then during the same time is we had trying to pull people together, as Stokely Carmichael, William Ricks was saying, used the term Black power, which was the narrative was changed by white society at that particular time is the white could be said, equate that to violence, which it was not. It was saying is Black people need the same power, same voice, and as white people did. And if you until you got that, you're not going to be able to be equal citizens. Today is that same kind of comparison might be made in terms of movement we have there. So Black Lives Matter, they're changing the narrative to what that means, that whole piece means. And so the whole thing has happened is that we have now is what we suffer from looking at, whereby we don't have communities anymore. The result of that is, so people are saying that Black people live into these little nooks and places whereby you don't have anything that's in there that makes a real community. And blaming Black people for the violence and stuff is but we're stuck in a situation where there's very little choice for what we do and other alternatives. It's because we're right together, there's no place out and trapped into those particular areas and places. And the walls around us now is having to be expressways and other places and pieces. So in a sense is the movement has to surge forward, to surge backwards, but there's a real comparison to where we are. For what happened then, how we got from where we were with the surge backwards to move to where we are now. Now, the other piece is very briefly is in terms of how do we feel we do with this. I was looking at the face of the panelists and the people here on all this. It's almost like we're preaching to the choir because we all know, we got a feel for racism. Racism is here. The POTUS, what he did was, which is one good thing he did, was to peel back the onion and expose America and its racism. So there's no middle ground anymore. You're either a racist or you're not a racist. No thing in the middle here. So he's made sure of that, and he's made sure he keeps it that way. And so that's something we have to really deal with. It's the reality of this country. Because when you say that he has 35 to 40% followers, that's a whole lot of people. Because when he became president of the United States, that's what was being counted as his followers around 35 to 40%. So that's a biggie. So it's something to be kept taken lightly when we look at this whole piece. So putting it together is one of the things we did in the civil rights movement in the 60s is we felt we had all these white kids involved, people involved, so we had to come with a piece. We said, well, the problem that not exist in the Black community, the Black community was where it was as a result of the problem, all right? So what we need is white kids to go back home and begin to work and organize their white communities.
30 seconds.
They need to go be able to educate the white community piece. And so I'm saying is today is what we need to focus on. We need to get white kids and white people to begin to have these discussions in white churches. We have these discussions in the white YMCAs and other places, institutions that have is because that's where you have to make the change at. We know what the problem is, and we're not the ones who have the knees on our own neck is. I mean, they have the knees on our neck. So to get it off is we need to begin to make that approach it. So thanks very much for having me, and I've enjoyed this. I hope this helps but there's a great comparison to where we were then and where we are now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dennis. We had time, would have let you go on in with this because that was a lot of great information. putting it into the historical context of where we've come from culturally, why our structures and our communities are the way that they are, tying it into the education piece, and seeing how today and back in the day, not so different in that it really is going to involve a change of white allies to really make the difference here. So we thank you for sharing your knowledge, sharing your wisdom with us, and sharing your experience, and really truly educating us all. So we very much appreciate it. We're going to go into our last portion of our program where we're going to resume our panel discussion. Just again, to give housekeeping rules for everybody. If you are not answering a question, please feel free to mute your phone, your app. If you need to get up, stretch your legs or anything, that's fine. Just please turn off your camera for a second and then turn it back on whenever you come back to us. I will be keeping time per panelist. You will have 3 minutes to answer each question. At 1 minute, you'll hear that. I'll play another ding at 15 seconds. And then at the conclusion, you will hear this. And then I'll address you by name and say conclusion so you can wrap up your thought. Again, the chat is open. You can ask any questions, share any thoughts that you may have. We don't as much today have time for rebuttal style, a debate, if you will, but we do want to make sure that everybody's thoughts, questions are answered. So at another time, Demetra will present that information to everybody. So we'll go ahead and get started with the second part of our discussion. So question number 3, and on this question, we will be hearing from Joshua, Stephanie, Quinn, and Christine. So question number 3 is, some minorities have bought into systemic racism, either knowingly or unknowingly. Why do you believe this has happened? And Joshua, we have you up first. Let me know when you're ready. Right.
Thanks. I think that with the culture being so built in, I feel like it ingrains in everybody's thought process to where it's like people are brainwashed in a way, but it's not. I guess brainwashed might not be the right word, but it's so ingrained in the way people live. And I see it, or I feel like I see it, and it like baffles me because I'm like, you're not even, helping your own self, and you're going against your things that are good for you. When I see stuff like that, and I think it's really just a lack of maybe awareness, and it, but it does blow my mind because I've lived all over Louisiana, and I see things that are just so, I feel like it's just so heavily baked in that I don't know how to illuminate to make change. And that's just all I got, I guess.
They understood. Okay, and then next we'll have Stephanie Quinn. So Stephanie, would you like to answer for us? Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay.
And if I don't respond to the beeps, feel free to yell at me.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Will do.
Because I've heard so many things today that took the things I was thinking about the answer to this question to a different level. And so I fear I could go on and on. And in fact, fear is one of the things that I'm catching on. Our speaker mentioned the narratives being changed to Black power equals violence. And I'm thinking back to things I learned in school about, for example, the Black Panthers. And it was always told in this narrative around fear. Gosh. And there's the fear of talking together about things. There's a fear of admitting, and I'm saying this from experience, of like catching where I did or had ingrained thoughts that were racist, and to say that out loud and explore what it is. There's fear around admitting to that and having that label, admitting to, I did this. I had this thought and I am extremely embarrassed, horrified to realize it. And can I talk about that with others and have them, go beyond the stories that we're told as nice white people to say about ourselves, I'm also thinking a lot about today. We heard about being separate, being separated from our communities. And that also makes me think about the seeding in white supremacy to be individuals, to lift ourselves up individually. That I saw that as a criticism of the book White Privilege, that all of the suggestions in that book are based on people acting individually, not systemically. Yet there's a narrative around that, to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and we got to do it on our own. And I think we have to go past that. Thank you, Amy.
Oh, you have 45 seconds left.
Oh, it's okay. I'll stop there.
Okay. All right. So next we're going to have Quinn. Let me know when you are ready, Quinn.
I am ready.
Okay. All right. 3 minutes.
So your question was, some minorities have bought into systemic racism either knowingly or unknowingly. I think from me and just from my experience, so backstory, my family actually grew up in the South Side of Chicago, and my mom was very fortunate to be that person that always really stood out, and always was that person that was going to go a little bit further. And so I'm very thankful for her for that reason, to have plateaued and taken my siblings and I to another level for us to then continue that cycle on with my family for sure. And so I say unknowingly and knowingly, the reason why minorities have fallen to systemic racism is due to your environment, right? And I think it has to fall into also that lack of education of knowing about the systemic racism. And it goes back to exactly like Stephanie and all of you all have said, if you look in what's in our textbooks, what's all around us, it's embedded in a way that it's kind of built into our environment that we really may either be blind to it or be educated on it and then have to figure out a way to get through those systemic racism things that are built into our country. So my overall answer to that is that it's built into our environment and the things around us, and then the lack of education that's given to us or that is given to us, and trying to find a way to make a change for the continuous generations. That's my answer.
All right. Thank you so much, Quinn. And we will now have Christine give her perspective. Let me know when you're ready.
Ready? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. So I had a couple of thoughts when I sat down with this, and I wanted to kind of compartmentalize it by knowingly and unknowingly, because if we're being realistic or, honest within the Black community, we do both. And when I say knowingly, how we knowingly kind of fall into that, it is a form of fight or flight in the Black community. It is that idea that we must assimilate or face penalty. Historically, since we were brought over, from the continent of Africa, it has always been a fight or flight response from us, right? And flight being assimilate, I guess, for us in this scenario. And so for us, we were given these parameters that, you see it in the news, you see Black men and, the police brutality, or, how poor Ahmaud Arbery could be chased down in the middle of the road and shot because he didn't comply to people he didn't know chasing him down the street. There is a requirement by many in outside of our communities that tells us you assimilate or you die. You assimilate or you go to jail. You adapt or your rights. You have no right to any of the Constitution because you didn't follow my instructions because you're Black. So that's a form of how we do it knowingly, when we tell our kids how to behave when the police pull you over, when we tell our kids pull up your pants when you go in white communities, when we talk about our kids, how they should talk. Even though one could say Black dialect is a language of its own, and so we could constantly have to code switch because we are told to assimilate or face penalty. Unknowingly, I would just like to touch on something that, you know, within the Black community I feel is an issue, and it is colorism. There is a serious issue with the glamorization or fetishization, sorry, can't get that word out today, of women or men of lighter complexion that has been pre-programmed into us over years, backdating to slavery and how they were set up between the house and the field. That is an issue that has to be stopped. No one is greater than the other, but when people outside of your community treat people that look closer to them in any hue better, it creates, you know, contention within the community. You get people that do see that it is unjustly unfair, and then you grow resentment because, you know, they're using that form of systemic racism and white privilege to, I'll give this group a little more access. And it further keeps our groups divided. And, you know, within our community, we knowingly buy into that with how we glamorize kind of the ambiguous Black woman. And I think that that's something that as a community, we have to sit and really say, like, okay, we don't know that we're doing this, or we're doing it subconsciously, but we're going to call it to the floor, and we're going to begin to, you know, spotlight those and heal them and say, no, I'm not going to be separated or glamorized because I look closer to you. I'm Black, point blank, period. And I think that's definitely a way that has happened, and why it goes back to just that fight or, you know, assimilate argument.
Thank you so much, Christine, for that perspective. Touched on a lot of things there. Assimilation, colorism that is experienced in our community. Also, another thing, respectability politics, I think, when it comes to the internal dynamic of our communities, of where if we do talk a certain way, we look a certain way, we dress a certain way, we'll be treated better. And at first it was a survival tactic with us to deal with outside communities. And now it's even playing into a thing of, if you look a certain way, if you talk a certain way, you are better than this certain type of Black person. And it's almost assigning a value system to our own selves and our own community. So thank you for sharing about that. We'll go on to our next question, which will be for Janine, Stephanie, and Daphne. And this one is getting to our points where we're trying to circle around solutions for this talk. And it is, give 2 examples of how systemic racism and white privilege can begin to be dismantled. So first we'll go to Janine, and let me know when you're ready.
Ready, yeah. So,
Okay.
okay, so I think it's important, especially for white people, to get educated because we still tend to self-segregate. So some white people can live their whole life with very little meaningful interaction with people of color. And so my 2 suggestions for beginning to dismantle white privilege and systemic racism has to do with that. And both of these are things that I've actually participated in, and I feel have been helpful for me as a white woman. Number 1 is a book club that I have been involved in, and it's a multicultural women's book club that kind of started as a result of Dallas Institute of Humanities did a panel called Questions of Color, and I didn't get to go to that because I got really sick, but I was on the email list, and from that a book group was created, and actually Stephanie, who's on the panel, she was in that group with me. But it's a diverse group of women. We've been meeting for almost 3 years, and we meet every month. We read books about race in America, and we talk about it. And this does 2 things. So from my perspective as a white woman, it has educated me on the lived experiences of people of color. And it's also provided me an opportunity to form meaningful relationships with these women. And so when it becomes personal is when you get that. unfortunately, I will say this, like for some white people, when it becomes personal, that's when you get the motivation to want to go out and like fight for justice. The second suggestion is part of my the nonprofit that I work with is called Visible Unity, and it's similar. We have what's called a unity process, and it's a 9-session engagement experience that brings diverse people together to exchange and information and to grow through discussion and experience. And we meet regularly kind of at a neutral location, and it's composed of about maybe 10 people. And that I also participated in that, and that as well has been a way for me to be educated, and then to like go out and figure out ways to because that's really what it is having to get white people to wake up. Was that little beep beep to say goodbye?
No, you have 15 seconds left.
Okay. Because another thing we do through Visible Unity is we have safe space conversations, and right now we're doing that weekly on Zoom. Before all this craziness happened, we would do it quarterly, and we would meet at a restaurant in East Dallas, where people could come and just ask the questions that they were always afraid to ask about race. And that as well has been a great way to at least start the education process.
Definitely great examples, Janine. Thank you so much for that. It does start with, if you aren't familiar with a community and you want to know about them, integration and interaction is definitely an amazing way to start. So thank you for sharing. And Stephanie, your turn up. Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay.
And I need to acknowledge that when I spoke earlier, I centered my comments on white experience instead of minority experience. And I'm actually going to do this again because I wanted to briefly talk about my daughter, who decided in junior high that she wanted to be a police officer. That was in Missouri, and Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri, and she decided to be part of the protesters there, and also to challenge the way that she thought about policing. And so she looked for programs in criminal justice that were looking at community policing and other ways to change the dynamic there. And what we really learned is that policing, training for policing, is vested in fear. It's the same narrative that we were talking about before. To find programs that are not about training police officers to be fearful, it is extremely challenging. We found 2 programs in the entire United States. So I see this as one of the ways that we can dismantle white supremacist power-based systems, is by challenging how cops are trained to see people, to interact with people. And I also see where we can do that as communities. For example, in San Jose, right before the 4th of July, the city created what I think of as a tattle form to report people for shooting fireworks illegally, versus going out and talking to our neighbors about what's happening. I think that's one of the ways we're kept separate, and we have to look at all of those reporting forms that take individuals in community out of contact with each other. That's all.
Thank you for that, Stephanie. Great points brought up there as far as how police are trained, funding for training and availability, and also how they encourage the community to interact as well. Not so much interact with each other, but to tattle, to tell. And it goes back to, a slavery Jim Crow dynamic where you were kind of rewarded to, basically, essentially tattle on people instead of help them, educate them, type of thing. So thank you for that. And Miss Daphne, let me know when you are ready.
give 2 examples of how systemic racism and white privilege can begin to be dismantled. Reparations, and our Constitution needs to be overhauled. Reparations, and my internet connection is unstable. So with reparations, the Emancipation Proclamation stated that we were supposed to be rewarded 40 acres and a mule. Okay, of course now 40 acres and a mule, what would that equate to? I'm not sure, but we could use that. Okay, we are woefully behind financially, economically. That would establish, well, it would give us a foundation to establish some of these systems that we need to be in place. It would also give us an opportunity to establish a political foothold. One of the things that we lack is political representation. So we could start there. Free education. We were denied education. We could not, it was illegal to read. It was illegal to write. Our people were killed when they taught other slaves to read and write. So that put us even further behind. We know we can show the correlation between education and the amount of money that can be made. Okay, we were denied both of those. So moving forward, if we want to change anything, we've got to have some funds behind it. Reparation, it has to be something tangible. And until we get that, we're still spinning wheels until we get reparations and acknowledgement for things that have been done. I wrote a couple of things down. A lot of people are not, you may disagree with this, but integration was a problem. As Mr. Dennis said, when we had our own communities and when we were together, the village took care of a lot of things. We've gotten away from that. That assimilation thing, why do we have, it's not necessary. So, and I know that's an unpopular belief, okay? I'm sorry, that's how I feel about it. I like being with my own people. Everybody does. A lot of times we separate ourselves. Sometimes it's just unintentional because we are more comfortable with people that look like us. That's just a reality. It's nothing wrong with that. How we treat each other is the problem.
Absolutely. Daphne, did you have any thing else to add to that?
Mm-mm.
Okay. And you unpacked a lot there. Definitely don't feel like the integration comment is something you have to, say may be unpopular. To put that
sorry, I missed all of that.
Oh, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. I said, don't feel like saying the integration comment is unpopular. Let me put it into context for anyone who may not understand. I come from a line of educators. My grandfather in Louisiana was the first dean of schools, which is kind of like assistant superintendent in his parish. And he was the last principal at the segregated high school, which closed in 1970. When schools integrated, we had a whole community, as Mr. Dennis said, as Daphne said, of professional people, people with advanced degrees in arts, sciences, trades. And when integration happened, a lot of those people lost jobs. They were forced out. It wasn't necessarily that we wanted to be, we all had to come into one space. What we wanted was equal funding, equal opportunities, and things like that. So in a lot of ways, integration did hurt the Black community because it took away those jobs, because when you combine something, only a handful of people are going to have those opportunities, and the opportunities more often than not went to white people. Reparations, absolutely. You think to Native Americans in this country and the things that they've endured as an indigenous population. They're afforded the opportunity to go to college free a lot of times. They're afforded housing voucher things because of the things that they've endured. Japanese community as well, for being interred in the 1940s during World War II. So there are different times where the United States has you know, offered some reparation, financial opportunity, etc. So it is very important that the Black community gets their just due, whether that is free education,
Loan forgiveness.
yeah, loan forgiveness, thank you, an elevated credit score, all of these things, housing opportunities.
Income taxes.
Thank you. Yeah, so those, wanted to make sure I went back to that, so anyone who may not have ever heard that comment before, we're all on the same page with it. So thank you, ladies, for providing some great insight on that question, which brings us to our last question, and it is in relation to question 4, but we're going to have a few new people speak. Well, Janine will speak again on this one. So the last question, number 5, is give 2 ideas on how the examples from number 4 can be measured for effectiveness. And we'll have Janine, Quinn, Justin, and Clinton comment on this question. So Janine, we'll go up first with you.
Sure. And it's Jeannie, but that's
okay. Oh, I'm so sorry, Jeannie. There we go.
No one ever gets my name right. Don't worry about it. Well, okay, so yeah, I thought about this as far as like the examples I gave with the book club and Visible Unity with the different programs that we have as far as how they can be measured. And I honestly, I don't know, unless it's just numbers, like in terms of like, actually, I do know Visible Unity because Pam, my friend Pam Fields, she's the founder of it, and she did her whole dissertation on it. So I think, you know, in terms of the book club, it could be measured in terms of how many people we sign up, and that's actually our book club does this. Like we create, I want to call them sister book clubs because right now they're just women, but I don't think it has to be just women. But we've birthed, if you want to say, one, and we're starting another one. So there's 3 so far. So it could be measured in terms of like how many book clubs are created. And that, like, I know that might sound like a book club. What does that do? But it does like create relationships. And I mean, I with doing this for 3 years, I've developed some really deep, beautiful friendships with women that I wouldn't have. And that's given me like such a passion and a desire to like, this is what I want to do every day, like work for racial justice. And so, and then the Visible Unity, that's definitely like the unity process. I mean, Pam, she goes and debriefs everyone after we've gone through the process to get feedback. And I know that for both people of color and Caucasian people who have participated in it, it's been a valuable learning experience that, you know, we can take with us and help to kind of bring, you know, what we've learned to these other questions in terms of, you know, like reparations. I love that. I absolutely 100% think that that's what we need to be doing, like free college, free, I don't know how people feel about school vouchers, because I know they can be a little controversial, but just some sort of like, for sure, like, free college, free trade school. If people want to have, you know, money to go towards a private school, I don't know, sometimes like I have a crazy idea, like if we made private schools illegal and like just made it where everyone had to go to public school, I know that would never go over in America, but it's like, then we would all be invested in the same system. And, you know, you don't have these rich white families like going to these little private schools of white flight, which drives me crazy. Anyway, I heard the little beep, so I'll stop.
Thank you, Jenny. Appreciate it. That's definitely an idea worth exploring, because if everyone was invested in the same system, as you said, we would probably have a lot of different outcomes versus the ones that we have right now. So let's see. Quinn, we'll kick it to you to answer, and let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready. Okay, so I'm in the same boat as Jeannie as far as ways to measure it. I know you can think of quantifying numbers or things that you can track if you're looking for specific numbers. I can speak from my own experience of ways of which, so I'm a part of the Collin County Black Chamber of Commerce, and I sit as the chairwoman of the Young Professionals Group. And so one of the ways that we measure how we're making change is, one, we seek out Black-owned small businesses. We seek out whether they have the right funding, how can we speak on their behalf. We look to see whether they have enough resources to open their doors. We look to measure what their performance is when there's peak seasons, when we need to all come together as a community to support them more. So I can speak from that realm of how to support small businesses, to help them flourish, to make sure that we're all coming together, to reading into the different programs or government assistant programs that are for small businesses, and seeing how we can then speak to better help and bring awareness to how they may be oppressing Black small businesses, and how we can help to make that better. So that's where I can say how we can measure in our community. I would say for me personally, I know I didn't get the answer of what we can do to help, but one of the three things that I say how we can help and then begin to continue tracking that is threefold, right? I see it as educating, using your platform, and getting plugged into your community. And those three things all feed into one. They're all connected in some way. And so if you can find ways to measure how you are educating the people around you, how you are educating yourself, how you are reflecting on what your internal biases are, to using your platform, how are you making a difference in your organization? That's big, as you don't even know what. How are you making a difference in your home, your family, and then getting plugged into your community? Are you involved in nonprofit organizations? Are you aware of the programs or the policies that are in place locally, and how are they changing, and who is in those seats, right, that are making those decisions, and educating yourself to make sure you know that your people are being represented the right way. That's all I have.
Thank you so much, Quinn. Economic empowerment is definitely a big piece of the puzzle, and it is one big way that we're going to have to attack to solve this issue. It's a literal all sides issue. So you can pick a segment of society and what we have going on and pick a way to be able to get in there. So thank you for providing those examples. And then now we're going to have Justin provide his thoughts on this. So let me know when you're ready.
Okay. So, sorry. Give two ideas of how examples of number 4 can be measured for effectiveness. I answered these questions basically beforehand. So this was more for like, how can we measure, how can we measure like police? So different policing programs was one of them. How, I forgot her name. I'm so sorry. You said your daughter was a police officer, her. And then statewide and countrywide database for officers who show like disorderly conduct, or anyone who has multiple like red flags or anything just wrong. Here in Utah, we're actually trying to get a civilian review board. So instead of policing, like people, basically the police checking on those other police cases and saying that it was okay, is gonna basically be cut off, and it would go to the civilian review board. But we have to also make sure that that would be an everybody thing, and that we're well represented under them. We also have to make sure education, the previous panelist said, education is one of the biggest things. President Obama tried to establish a review board. I'll read that later. And yeah, I think different policing programs and education is our main focus.
All right, well, thank you so much, Justin, for that. Definitely, you know, how we police is one of those things that we have to get a grab grapple on in this country, whether it comes from citizen review, defunding the police, which I know is a scary word for some people, but you know, we
Yeah.
take ones out of education. So
And I think Jeannie said too, white people educating themselves and others is just like a big step in the right direction, basically. But it needs to happen, and sometimes it's hard to basically be anti-racist, but just a conversation with saying why it's wrong to be racist is the biggest move, basically, in the right direction.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Justin.
Thank you.
Yeah, finally, we're going to have Clinton share his thoughts on this. So, Clinton, let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay, 3 minutes.
All right. So, yeah, I think there is change and measuring on a personal level, like several of y'all said. Don't underestimate the power of what we can do in our households, in our neighborhoods, in our schools. I think that's huge, and that's where change is going to start. But Stephanie had a great idea. Wow. Her and her daughter looking at non-fear-based police training, and they only found 2 programs. I mean, that's something easy to measure, right? To lobby in your area and say, listen, this seems like a revolutionary idea. More kind of bridge building training as opposed to fear-based. You know, I think that's certainly something that could be measured in terms of effectiveness, number of states and counties that adopt some sort of program like that. Then measuring your own city's track record on fair housing. I mean, here in Dallas, we've seen so many, for instance, the West Dallas community getting, you know, destroyed and rebuilt, and pushing out the Black and Hispanic tenants there. Measuring what your track record in your city is in terms of providing fair housing. We have Opportunity Dallas here that several years ago finally, amazingly, adopted a housing policy for Dallas. So building on things like that can measure areas of the city that we're protecting those residents that have been here for so long, that add voices to a well-rounded discussion as opposed to pushing them out to the suburbs. Dismantling property tax-based school funding so that every school in your district has adequate funding. I mean, I grew up in Dallas Independent School District, remember going to Madison High School for basketball games, and I don't think their gym had been renovated probably since the 50s, you know? I mean,
Still hasn't.
Yeah, I mean, that's terrible. I mean, why should they not enjoy the same things that people do elsewhere? And then I know this is controversial. Daphne feels otherwise, and hey, we all have our different opinions in terms of integrating schooling. I was part of the era of majority to minority school system in Dallas, and I'll tell you what, half of the reason why I'm here sitting on this phone call is because of the relationships I built in high school. And so I think there is something to be said for that, and putting a face with this discussion, and having friends. Hey, my friends are suffering. Let's do something about this. And integrated schools forward that dialogue. So that's something to think about. And finally, measuring the number of progressive politicians, progressive leaders we can put into to city and county and even state positions that can forward these agendas. You know, I'm not naive to think that that's the only thing. I listened to a discussion recently. Freddie Haynes, who's a popular activist minister here in Dallas, stated that just because you put progressive politicians in office, it's kind of like baking a cake. If you don't add the sugar while you're baking the cake, they have very little effect if you just sprinkle the sugar on top of the cake after it's already been baked. So the point is that, yeah, we need progressive leaders in place, but we also need to make visible that in every one of our cities, who's really running the program. It's those white business leaders that are really trying to say, hey, we're the ones that fund your tax base, the priority is ours and what we think counts. And if it works out for the rest of you guys, then we'll talk about race. Then we'll talk about equity. So to really recognize that that's something in each of our cities that really drives and prioritizes these discussions, and then to put leaders in place that can help address and make those things visible, I think are critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Clinton. I think that was a good summarization of the panel thoughts. Lots of different areas we can help to really quantify this and put some real solutions in place. So I want to thank the entire panel for your time this afternoon. We really appreciate all of your collective thoughts, your collective voices. And the work that was done today is going to be meaningful to help educate others. Although it is us on the call and, you know, an audience as well, this information will be shared. And you never know who may have a thought bubble and say, this is an idea I never considered. Let me research into this. So I want to thank you all for sharing your thoughts today. And we'll get a final thought from you here in a few minutes. Then want to open it now up to the audience as well. We'll give about 3 minutes collectively for the audience to, if they would like to share anything. We ask that all audience comment be limited to 30 seconds. But first we'll start with Ms. Dr. Matiko Austin.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be a part of this discussion. I just had some really, 30 seconds, so I have some really quick ideas with regard to solutions and measurable or tangible outcomes. One of the things I liked what Daphne mentioned early on, which was change of the Constitution. While that is a stretch from today, changing the Constitution takes down the barrier or the wall that many hide behind to further the racist agenda. And so if we could look at ways to, from a political perspective, getting more people of color and minorities in political offices to really look at rewriting that Constitution, we will lower the wall that many law enforcement officers, judges, those who are in power, that often further the agenda of racism. From a personal perspective, or something that we can all possibly do, is educate. It has been said that education often touts an equal level playing field. And when each one can teach one, then we have the opportunity to further discussion of racism, but more importantly, talk about solutions and ways of change. And so I like the idea of the book club that Jeannie mentioned, that Stephanie mentioned, and having those difficult, uncomfortable conversations with people that do not look like you, asking questions, but more importantly, listening to those who do not look like you and what they say is racist or racism, then taking that for truth. Maya Angelou once said that, the great Maya Angelou said that when a person tells you who they are, believe it. It's not up to you to question what I think or what you think is racism, but it's up to you to believe when I say, if you reach to touch my hair and my hair is kinky and curly and I'm offended by that, then I'm offended by that. So I believe that what we can do is have these difficult and challenging discussions with ourselves of those that look like us and those that do not look like us, but more importantly, seek to ask questions so that you can understand and further the conversation. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Austin, for that and giving context to everything that was said. We really appreciate your comments. Do you want to ask if there is anyone else from the audience on the call that was not on the panel? If they would like to comment, let me know now. Okay, I will say if anyone has any more questions or thoughts, please go ahead and make sure that you load those up in the comments. And we will allow Demetra to give her final thoughts, and then we'll go to the panel for some thoughts. Oh, Demetra, if you can go in closer to the mic. I don't know if we can hear you. I don't think we can hear you. No. Okay, we'll come back. We will come back to our gracious host. So first, I'll just do this popcorn style. So you guys will have 60 seconds. You'll only hear one ding, which will mean 15 seconds, and then you'll hear the final little beep beep at the end. So we'll go start with Janine. Let us know your final thoughts.
Well, thank you so much. And especially, I just want to thank you to David, Dennis, that I was so honored to hear your words and your history. And so thank you so much for being here. I am an eternal optimist. I have to be, or else I wouldn't get out of bed every day. And so I absolutely 100% believe that this is something like it's a marathon, not a sprint, what we're doing. And I know we get discouraged, and I'm sure there will be more times that we're discouraged, but we just like keep going forward. And I've tried, I don't know how to, I want to like copy and paste some links into the chat. So if anyone knows how to do that, you can tell me, because there's a couple websites I'd love to share with you. But yeah, I think education for sure is number one, so important. And branching out and listening to diverse perspectives and respecting them. And Dr. Austin, just like you said, absolutely, you believe what someone tells you, and you honor their experience.
Thank you so much, Shani. So we will try Demetria again.
Thank you.
Oh.
I have my Bluetooth on. Okay. I just wanted to thank everyone, the panelists, as well as the audience, for hanging in with us, listening, participating, giving thoughts and ideas. As I mentioned in the chat, the overarching reason for this conversation is to develop actionable and measurable solutions. A lot of solutions were brought forward. They will need to be really examined and dug deep into in order to carry them forward out to the community. That is the purpose of the Each One Teach One. And once we do that and set these solutions in action, we will definitely measure them, and then we will bring the results of the solutions back, not only to the audience, but I'll publicize them on the website, the www.scbconnection.org website, and I'll publish them on Facebook and Instagram as well. So again, thank you all very much. Thank you, Uncle Dave. I really, really appreciate you taking the time out. And I really believe in this effort, and I think that moving forward, we definitely have something good in the works. So thank you all.
It's my pleasure.
Yes.
Great job, BK.
Yes, thank you so much. So we will next go to Christine. Would you like to share your final thoughts with us?
Sure. Just kind of sharing, with Jeannie, and saying like I'm just really appreciative to be able to be here. And the biggest takeaway I would ask everyone just to consider is the denormalization of Black suffering. That's what a lot of the changes and suggestions that we're looking to implement here comes down to, is just denormalizing Black suffering in all of these different ways by making us whole. It'll be compartmentally at first, but we want to eventually get to that place where we are made whole. And I think that all the panelists here did a great job of establishing some points of origin as far as where we can start.
Okay, thank you for that, Christine. Next, we will have Justin. What are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts. Honestly, I'm so grateful to be here, and thank you so much for, I forgot his name, but he shared about his activist basically experience when he was younger. And that was nice to basically hear and know that change happens, but we have to basically be here to do it. Yeah, but yeah, I just want to say thank you.
Yes, thank you. And that was Mr. Dennis who shared his, I believe, was it Mr. Dennis who we were talking about earlier? Okay, yes. Yes, he definitely gave us a great education earlier on this. So next, Miss Daphne, would you like to share your final thoughts with us?
Excellent discussion. A lot of things covered, a lot of things to cover. We've been talking and having these conversations amongst ourselves a lot in a lot of my little pockets of people that I communicate with. So it's great to see us come together as a panel and to really start talking about some real things and some actionable items. So thank you very much, DK, for involving me. 6 years ago to this day, we were sitting down kind of talking about putting together your nonprofit and working it. Now you're working your jelly, girl. I'm loving it. Excellent.
Thank you so much, Daphne. And now we'll go to Joshua. What are your final thoughts?
Well, I'm just blown away to be able to, I'm so appreciative to be here today. And like everybody else, to be able to listen to Mr. Dennis. I've seen movies, I've read books, but to actually hear a live person, it just like, you know, gave me chills to be able to sit and kind of be in the same space. I would say that I would love to continue to connect with anybody here if you have ideas on HR staffing, how we can push the needle forward. And then also I would say be an advocate in your workplace. You know, go talk to the HR people and say, what are we doing to be inclusive? Are we having a metric or is it just lip service? But I really welcome anybody's feedback or thoughts because it feels like a pioneer sometimes, but it's worth it.
Absolutely, and thank you for that, Josh, especially from the HR perspective. Human resources touches us all if we're in the workforce, and that again is, you know, it's education or workforce where we experience a lot of systemic racism. So thank you so much for that. Clinton, would you like to share your final thoughts with us? Let me know when you're ready. Oh, we got you muted. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I feel grateful just to be a part of this pretty amazing discussion. I think it's early on. I think starting with your neighborhood, your family, book clubs is key. I just hope, you know, all of these demonstrations and discussions, as Dimitri has pointed out, with the focus of this panel, transitions to measurable action, right? Talk is one thing, but doing what Mr. Dave Dennis and his crew did, you know, a generation or two ago is what needs to be revved up again, and to really find actionable ways that we can affect change. I look forward to that. So thank you for letting me be a part of this discussion.
Thank you, Clinton. All right, and Stephanie, would you like to give your final thoughts?
The label Children of the Constitution was new to me, so I have some research to do. I feel inspired to learn a lot more about rewriting the Constitution. And I'm thinking a lot about systemic solutions in addition to the individual work that I'm already trying to do.
Thank you for that. And last but not least, we will hear from Quinn for our last panelist thought.
Great. I wanted to also say thank you for this opportunity. And again, hearing from Mr. Dennis was absolutely amazing. I did want to leave with two things specifically. One is I heard a lot of you all, especially me, advocate for our community to rebuild or come more together. And so I just encourage you all, if you're really serious about being a part of this movement, get involved in organizations, nonprofit. Also, if you are owner of a nonprofit, reach out to other nonprofits that are for the same cause so that we can get bigger, right? Because you cannot make a change if you're in your same little huddle it has to involve pulling in other people as well. I think my other thing I say is important is just educating yourself as well of this work, and just keep trying to move the needle on this as well. That's it.
Thank you so much, Quinn. And we do want to give Mr. Dennis the opportunity to give his final thought as well. Mr. Dennis, would you like to give a final thought for us?
Yeah, first of all, just thank you. This has been a great discussion. I sat through the whole thing, and I'm just thrilled. One thing I want to talk about, another narrative I just want to mention quickly, is when people criticize us about not wanting to stand of the national anthem, encourage them to read the third verse of the national anthem. Because you read the third verse of the national anthem, for us to stand on it as Black people stand up to it, we are honoring slavery and enslavement of our people. So I don't stand for it, and we should not stand for it. And if those who want to stand, if they want to sing the national anthem, sing all three verses and not be a hypocrite and just do the first two verses. God bless you. I'm with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And again, giving us historical context to everything and summing up everything just beautifully. I will give my thoughts before I kick it back to Ms. Demetra. Thank you all for sharing your different perspectives and providing a community of education here, because this is really what this is. We want to make sure that we have tangible, measurable outcomes and get beyond discussion to get out in the communities, whether it is establishing a book club with people who don't look like you, being able to sit down and have a conversation with your legislatures, your police, as far as how they're interacting with citizens, being able to fight for educational equity, making sure that your tax dollars are being allocated appropriately in your communities and surrounding. So all of those different things. I'm catching up on the chat and I'm reading, and it looks like Marcus and Dr. Austin pointed out a great thing: voting. We all have to vote. We need to make sure that we are registered to vote. If you have children or who are voting age or registered, your partners, everyone. And it is good to also bring your family to the poll if you do have small children, so they can know that this is a community practice. If you are in Texas, early voting is over. However, Tuesday is the actual primary voting day here in Texas. It is a Democratic primary, so if you voted in the first primary Democrat, then you are allowed to vote. It is very important because it will be the runoff for the Senate race in December. If you are in Texas, not telling you particularly who to vote for, but the Republican senator just said that he doesn't know if coronavirus can spread to children. So, things like that, you definitely want to make sure you educate yourself and be able to know all your candidates. I will share links with Demetra how to see if you are voting on the day of election. You do have to vote at your precinct. So I will share like a link with her so you can look up and see where you're voting at. Even if you're not all the way registered, it's okay. Go to the precinct anyway, ask for a provisional ballot, and the election judge will be able to set you up with that information. Voting is also going on this weekend right now if you're in Louisiana as well. They're finally having their presidential primary along with other things that got pushed back. So vote often, vote in every election. And those are my thoughts. So now I will kick it back to Ms. Demetra to wrap us all up.
One more thing about voting: you have until October 3rd to get registered. If you need to be registered, I will come to you and register you.
Yes.
Yep, and the way that Daphne has the ability to come to you and register you is because she is deputized in order to be able to do that. So if you want to be able to register people to vote, definitely look into becoming deputized to do that. And that's my final thought. Thank you all.
Thank you. All right. If y'all have any questions, put them in the chat. Reach out to Demetra. And this has been a great conversation. So thank you all. Bye.